As I put my prior thoughts on this video through the frontal space of my third dimensional receiver of my fourth dimension beingness, if the ideas that predate publication of Einstein's theories on by others on the subject of the fourth dimension are to be um, acknowledged. As I ran through these ideas through my mind, through my thoughts, I realized how off color this talk is going to be because although it directly addresses, and the topic is how social Darwinism led to um, global warming or climate change. I'm a person whose experiences play out in the chronology of the time and place I've lived in and what I was able to access in terms of learning from that time and place. Much the same way as the modernists who, for a while, were suspected of being influenced by Einstein, but it turned out by something predating Einstein in the first and second decade of the 20th century. Um, were bound by the time and place, and the chronology allowed a misperception to take place because people only vaguely apprehended those times and places. They wrongly thought it squared with the idea of Einstein's publications, when in reality, several of these modernist ideas were from fourth dimensional talks from before Einstein's theories were published. So you can see how chronology can play games with, if you follow me, which you may not. I mean, it's what I mean when I say this talk is a little bit off color. To go a little bit more in the direction of being sort of absurd theater, I feel called upon to explain to my friends, people in the police department, around the schools that I've attended, who might find this and be interested, Twitter peers, um, what it is that has been sort of a grievance about the inability to get a patient hearing from fellow students. I, I knew that I could follow academic histories and academic writing, so I wasn't afraid that I wouldn't be able to keep up in school. But I'm deaf. When I went back, I made honors, and the community college fraternity for scholars, Phi Theta Kappa. But the problem really goes back to a time when it was just the fact that in order to condense into a very brief time span, people give you 5 minutes, okay, I'll pay attention to you for 15 seconds, right? So you have to spin an accelerated version out. Accelerating learning is often extolled, but when um, the premises have to be identified, the evidence has to be identified, and interpretation, explanation are a bit cumbersome. Acceleration just comes off as over the top, flying off about things. Directly, academics is guilty of misidentifying the problem of environment and ecology. We think of norms, normal life, what we what we think of as safe community health and bystander laws, Samaritan laws, the sort of things that bring us together to do good by one another, to love truth and work together, and put aside our differences to share public space and things that make us exciting in our civics. Baseball comes to mind, school, town halls, safe passage through our public spaces, meeting new acquaintances, and so on. All depend on a good ecology. So there's something clearly being trafficked when gangs like the University of Pittsburgh, who had a lot of privilege and power and inside influence and corruption, wired around things. While spending the idea that getting ahead was about having power and being cunning and fighting hard and having secret missions, which the top law student said to me he wouldn't want to take me on a dangerous mission or something. Um, came packaged with the idea that there was this thing called the nature of reality, that caring about the environment, about civics, about public safety was what one of Trump's speechwriters who was attending that school at the time called my soft-hated anachronistic father. And he was Israeli. One of his buddies was working for John Schulman, who was caught ripping off the museums for $8 million in special books. And the police wouldn't listen to any of this. The postal police were deeply resentful when I tried to warn them about what Schulman was doing. What they allowed happened to me, the decapitation of my fetus and stuff for public Nazism, the racing around the school bus while I was a protesting passenger, the triggering of seizures and impacted neuroplasm, the horrible way that they used me and tortured me as a child, was in a gang who really loved Yoko Ono, producing songs called things like Flame Over Africa, and promising me protection from abuse. UW Dialectical poisoned me some more while complaining that my testimony about Good Samaritan black kids who saved me from a horrible beating, really ruthless. I had lumps all over my face. Was somehow an attempt to subvert the dominant paradigm. It had nothing to do with UW Dialectical. I was explaining why I refused to be afraid or intimidated by black people. They saved my life once. If not my life, they saved me from, they may have saved my life. It was a horrible beating. And some of those people were armed and dangerous, threatening to kill me at times. One of them tried to corner me with a dagger once. Slaughtering blows. Really, truly brutal beatings. What doesn't make any sense, except that there's a line in the sand that things must follow the dialectical equity story for the nature of reality that is poisoning the world with fossil fuels. Exxon is an equal opportunity employer. That's what you must keep thinking. Now, what I see in this is that the same hesitancy to look honestly at an attempt to explain a danger to public safety by an unarmed witness to our times is either paranoid schizophrenia or so accelerated that it's daft. Um, it borders on complicated because some of the evidence needs to be traced, has been tampered with by authorities who wanted it destroyed. When I refused to destroy it, they came at me with billy clubs. This is the sort of thing that makes you um, frightened of the mystique that pertains to what we consider to be progress in our society. Now, we know that what we consider to be progress is considered abnormal to, you know, the raised conservatives who are trying to make their ideas win, ha 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 ha, win, try to get things to square up with, try to get things to square up with their ideology. See, square up with their ideology. And so they simplify it by having an aversion for progressive values. So you choose. Do you want progressive values and social change, or do you want to be Trumpetonians at war with truth in the name of the nature of reality and social Darwinism and so on? But what if both of these polarities are working together in some obscure, hypnotic way to keep us focused on these binaries so that we don't actually open the hood and look at the challenging issue of people who have been able to work the set design and open and close the curtains and arrange in advance long-term set changes. The, because entertainment media has completely taken over what used to be, or at least what we were thought to call news. News is now people looking at scripts. Okay, the news in 15 years is going to be this, and we're ready for it. Okay, everybody get into place. And they play leapfrog behind the scenes from country to country. I mean, the FBI must be so grossly and firmly in the hands of NATO that they burn pictures of bald eagles every morning for kicks. I apologize if that's not true, but you can sympathize with why it seems that way to me. I have yet to find anybody honest enough to look in a disciplined and consistent way at the evidence. And I have a picture here. See this man on the wall? My grandfather, he worked at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. I I have I have his retirement cartoon from with hundreds of the most important and celebrated journalists in the history of the Midwest from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Yeah, I'm not trying to sell it to somebody. I'm not trying to get it robbed. I'm not trying to make people licky chops about this archive. What I'm saying is that this is a copy of the Fourth Estate spirit in America, evidence. And you would think, now I have a point to make here that I think everybody can identify as realistic: black, white, Chinese, Israeli, up or down. I think you can identify this point. I was clearly a member of the Fourth Estate. in a library clerk on the side of the Library Association's values, the American Library Association's values. And I had a brain trauma, which made some things difficult for me. Did you ever see that wonderful scene, that wonderful man that Spike Lee, that kook, comes up with Martin? That's the sort of impact this thing had on me. For a long time, I was wandering the streets. Can you help me find my way to that button? You would think, being a reasonably, visibly committed, talented person, if I said to somebody, please, I know this is important, but I don't know how to explain it, they would come and try to help me. You see, that's my point. It's like a fallen veteran on the battlefield. You race to his aid and try to help him instead of jeering, pointing, ridiculing, kicking him in the head, and so forth. Now, in light of the difference between right and wrong in that scenario that I just gave you, which is clear, one of the premises is the virginity proves rape, which is ridiculous. It has nothing to do with reality. Even the girl in question would admit that. Nothing to do with reality. It's grossly, hugely conflated absurdity in light of the practice of kicking in the head a fallen, wounded member of the Corps. You have to understand, I think, why we'd say that NATO must be burning pictures of bald eagles for breakfast. Even if it's not true, I apologize if it's not true, but you must understand where such an idea would come from. Real change, for example, who I like, basically want to step on my face as somebody who they say seeing is trying to get ahead. What's that got to do with anything? It's not since I've never done that to anybody else, I can't comprehend it, but I know that that's what they get up, wake up in the middle of the night, seizing, screaming about, he's trying to get ahead. And they wake up. I don't know where it comes from. I don't know how to comprehend it. I don't care for it. I have never said anybody who sold a painting owed it to me. I've never done it. So it's incomprehensible to me. But I know it's one of the cognitive fixes on the map of what happened. There's reason to believe that Peter Gabriel got his hands on a Flippy Tune postcard and hawked it to Gweener. And she said, we'll get him and make money off this postcard. And we'll put it in front of him like a bull. Sniff, sniff, put out for the quaff thing. And watch him leap. And then we'll see. Because the Licky Chop Squad is going to say, ha ha, see? He takes a gift. He's a corruption. And it's mania. And it's part of the school of evidence, which is an anti-school, which has closed our schools, which emerged in our schools, the nature of reality, the UW dialectical scythe of equity that cuts down innocent people and then claims they're from the fourth dimension as well. There's good and bad and everything. You do have to take good and bad in the world. And it's frustrating sometimes. We've been burdened with the past. And my mother used to tell me that Reagan came from an era when we hadn't learned how to challenge, much less conquer, many diseases. Polio was still a problem, for example. FDR was affected by it. He lived only to be 63. 63. I'm 61. FDR was a very important man. He lived a very satisfying life in many ways. He and Abraham Lincoln take precedence in some ways in American history. But she said it was this conquest of nature, Jazz, that got started because of the challenges of things like medicine and industry. But what happened is it got a mind of its own. People stopped caring about the Commonwealth. Chomsky says it's the curse of capitalism, but I think capitalism can be drained. He said, well, businesses realize that capitalism is suicide if it's not regulated, so they put in regulators. When businesses would look for that sort of thing. One of the things you learn from the field of mental health is the people who have no insight have to be constrained. Martha Gellhorn said that to me in one of her letters, a letter she wrote to me. She said racism is presumably incurable, so laws have to be made to restrain racism. I think that when we're dealing with something like social Darwinism, which comes in every color, it needs to be regulated against its own lack of insight. Social Darwinism is a mental illness that is tearing apart the fabric of civilization all over the world with this climate change business and the refusal to responsibly amend our practices to get a grip on it so it stops, so that our children have a safe society to live in, so that they can handle the challenges that are being thrown up from the future, so that they can adjust to it without going crazy with fright, with anger, with sorrow, with pain. A mystic who I've been talking about from Russia talks about this fright and horror and that a three-dimensional being feels when realizing their form is actually in the phenomena of the fourth dimension. I think that's where the stupid business about getting over the hurdle is. We can't just destroy our children's future and tell them, well, why don't you evolve, Knights of Resignation? What we have to do is regulate our tempers and our understanding of what we've done wrong and get a grip on it so that we stop it before it's too late. So, social Darwinism, I guess, I would conclude, is a fundamental factor in the refusal to listen to something that's important when it comes patiently to your door and says, I'm injured. Would you give me a moment of your time? Social Darwinism says, nah, you get out of here. Nah. And sits behind police headquarters desks sometimes. It sits in counselor's office for the disabled sometimes. It sits in agenda meetings of the status quo sometimes. It sits in city council sometimes. And sometimes it wears a very progressive face. And sometimes it stands aloof and all knowing with Trumpetoonism. but I think refusal to listen is a form of social Darwinism.